So hormone production, incredibly complicated. I have this great diagram that took me about 10 years to build, um, that goes into everything because I feel that we often think about it in a very linear closed loop system of hypothalamus in the brain, pituitary in the brain, and then gonads. So whether that be testes in men or ovaries in women. And it's just like wipe the hands, walk away. Those are the three things that are the regulators. And it is so much more complicated than that in both men and women. And in women, it's even more complicated because the cell types we have inside of our ovaries and our follicle health and everything else impacts it even more so in this like dynamic way. And of course, different hormones at different times of the cycle and under different other types of mediating influences. And so for me, when I look at like what are the big things? What are the things that we're looking at? I always look at it in terms of, okay, top down, bottom up. So
Mhm.
top down being, and it's not just the hypothalamus. Things are getting sent to the hypothalamus, so that shouldn't be where we start. It's our nervous system. That's what's signaling
Mhm.
our hypothalamus, and then it's the environment, both internal to the body and external to the body. So by internal to the body, I mean other systems. The thyroid has a massive impact on reproductive hormone production. The parathyroid, the pancreas, the liver, the biome, both vaginal and microbiome in our guts, cardiovascular system impacts it, lymphatic, and I could keep going on and on. I mean, muscular skeletal does, because of course, muscle itself is a massive, endocrine organ. Fat, adipose. Adipose is a massive factor in our hormone balance and regulation and activity. And then we have, outside the body, things like uh, physical activity, chronic and acute stress, sleep. Sleep's a huge one. Drugs, and not just PEDs. I'm talking like um, drugs and alcohol, recreational, endocrine disrupting chemicals, so that we are inundated. I mean, if you had surgery, that's going to impact you. If you had some type of, let's say, viral or bacterial, really advanced illness, even though it was acute, that still has an impact. I mean, part of what our immune system does is it cranks up DHEA, which is a hormone. And in the result of that is that it has a cascading effect. You may not realize it, but it does. There's something happening internal to you. A lot of women, for example, with like COVID, they were like, man, like my cycle just like wasn't the same the first one after I had a really severe COVID. And I'm like, yeah, because that's a physiological response to this really strong immune system reaction that you had to be able to fight it, where your DHA went sky high and then it dropped. And of course, DHA converts into estradiol. And so for a lot of women, that meant heavier bleeding, harder bleeding, and then also the inflammatory reaction that happens, which has that direct relationship to not only our ovarian hormone production, but our uterine environment, because we also have a very important role of the uterus itself. It also impacts our adrenal glands and other systems of the body. So the for me, when I think about like where and how are women making hormones, what are my key regulators? What are my key influencing agents? There are so many of them. I start though going, okay, let's look at top down. What's happening up top here? We have an environment, we have our nervous system, we have our hypothalamus, and we have our pituitary gland. My bottom up, I go, okay, we have my ovaries, but inside my ovaries, I have my follicles, I have my quality of them, and my quantity. And so follicles themselves are the little tiny hormone units that are inside our ovaries, and they are so important. So important. Not enough people talk about ovarian follicle health because it is directly impacted by androgen use. A lot of people don't realize that, but it is directly impacted by it, both positively in some circumstances and very, very negatively in other circumstances, depending on what's happening throughout the body. And then I also look at, some of our major players, which would be like adrenals, thyroid, adipose, um, because they are having a big impact on just that overall activity. I You'll hear me say activity over levels. Levels don't mean much to me if we don't put them in context. Somebody will be like, do you want to see my labs to see my levels? And I'm like, yeah, that's one piece of it. But levels don't tell me much because they're not telling me how you're actually utilizing it. how you're binding it, what's your receptor activity, how are you metabolizing it, where. We don't even know all the locations in the female body that androgen receptor exist. What we do know is that there's a huge degree of variance across individuals in terms of androgen receptor density, and that can be different in different systems of the body. So you can have a higher androgen receptor density, let's say in your deltoids, than you do in your calves. And you can have different androgen receptor density in your endometrium than you do in your adipose cells.
Mm.
That changes how you're going to respond to androgens.
I love, and this is actually probably one of my favorite things about how you educate your audience and listeners is that it's not enough to simply just say, okay, well, A to B, here is the conversion, here are the levels to look at on this paper that you're working with your contest prep coach on. Um, it's a snapshot. The lab work is really limiting, and it can be a step in the right direction, I think, for some individuals, but in the grand scheme of things, without the context, I mean, like, that there's this much water in the glass. You don't know the contents, you don't know whether it has been there for an extended duration, or if it was just placed. I think a lot of individuals, they see the lab work and they're hopeful. But even within that, I mean, the discrepancies in reference ranges relative to the time in which the labs were drawn, relative to the last injection for an individual who, let's say, is using injectable TRT. Um, I think that's a portion of the conversation that oftentimes gets missed, particularly in the private business sector of endocrinology, wellness, health clinics. I think there is an aspect to that then the client takes as, well, we just need to get this done once, and then past that, I'm good. I'm just good indefinitely until my goals change. Um, I guess walking through for the listeners, walking through the diagnostics process in terms of timing those diagnostics, and why it isn't just uh, get it done next Tuesday. Oh, you don't know when your last period was? That's fine. Just get it done at your earliest convenience.
Yeah. So I can give you 4 steps. So my 4 steps for, diagnose, let's just say how I assess. I can break it into four. One, first, you got to understand the situation. Two, understand why the situation occurred. So usually that's why somebody's coming to you. Is it because they're having just like irregular side effects? Are they having amenorrhea? Are they, wanting to drop body fat? Understand why they have body fat in the first place. Develop a effective action plan, and then always execute, monitor, manage, modify. That I would say is the bulk of what I do. After, of course, understanding the situation. For me, lab work, and this is one of my big pet peeves right now, which there's a lot of them, but this is one of them, is that lab work without a full assessment first is like throwing shit against the wall and hoping something's going to stick. It is completely nonsensical because we don't know who we're even working with. There are certain lab markers that I see people get from other uh, health and wellness professionals. And I'm like, why did you spend $75 on this marker that means absolutely nothing because the assay that they use isn't even standardized or accurate? Like, because people are out to lunch with even understanding labs. Or why did you get one, let's say, why did you get TSH done, but you didn't get T4 and T3, right? We have to look at things full picture. Or why, oh my gosh, I can go off on this one. Hormone therapy, telemed, not running FSH and LH in women. And I've seen this more than once, and I'm like, wait a second. You're assessing for potentially testosterone um, deficiency, which is still not something that's diagnosed in, I mean, I can pretty much say Western democratic societies as a actual clinical diagnosis in women, but that you're assessing this with not even looking at proper markers that we would use to assess a female's reproductive capacity, which we're making our testosterone in a large part from our ovaries. Like it just, to me right now, the lab world, it's so chaotic and crazy. And it scares me because I think that people invest a lot of confidence in labs to be able to be the thing that tells them what's right with them or what's wrong with them. They look to a single marker. And that, number one, there is like no lab marker we look in isolation, first of all. Second of all, test, retest. Rule number one of research, right? We have to have replicable data. So we don't just, look at one lab and call it a day. The other thing is that the actual context and the environment in which we do labs has to make sense. And a lot of times people come to me and it just doesn't make sense because either, a big one is they haven't considered any of the false positives or the false negatives that could arise from either the medications they're taking, the supplements they're taking, or the lifestyle that they're committed to, such as not taking a rest day and then wondering why their liver enzymes are so high, or doing their fasted morning cardio and then wondering why their cortisol is so high. It's just these small things make big differences, not only in getting an accurate data set, but also guiding your complete clinical journey. And I see people that get treated for things that are false positives or false negatives, and it's terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, no, it did. Gosh, no, I mean, this is one of the things that I feel so strongly about at the moment, because it's in my face, as I'm
yeah.
sure it is in yours, is protocols being given, that have very much irreversible
Mm-hmm.
consequences, that the client has not only not been, they've been failed to be educated on, but the actual plan itself, like there is no care plan. It's a matter of putting them on the drug, then going off symptomology, which to me is it just complete asinine to put someone who's looking to do better at a competition, looking to build a little bit more muscle faster in their mid 20s, putting the sending them on their way. Oh, your test is kind of low. Here is some Anavar to support your testosterone levels. You can just take this for your competition season. And seeing that time and time again at inappropriate doses, and that's really more the performance enhancement side, but even the within the scope of HRT,
Mm-hmm.
seeing individuals put at doses that are supporting low to even moderate male physiological territory for serum testosterone, and having clients, potential clients, come to me and like, I was never asked to follow up on these labs. My labs came back 300-400 nanograms per deciliter, and I was asked, "How's your sex drive? How's your energy? How are your workouts going?" Well, your workouts better be going fucking good because you have male testosterone levels. So
Yeah.
I would hope they're going well. And it's the gap in knowledge, I think, from the consumer to the provider. It is, as you said, it's chaotic, and it's extremely concerning. And it's
Mm-hmm.
where I think like just under having a baseline understanding around like any of these drugs, what their use is, but also understanding their role, and the effects, not just in the immediate, but what that looks like down the line in terms of fertility. uh, I think it does need to be, it is necessary,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that people are just missing the mark on time and time again.